Hello and welcome to Rulelord Unchained. This is a spin-off stream of Rise of the Rulelord, my primary podcast, and I, of course, am your fossilized and nearly extinct Rulelord Pete. Today I am talking about a subject that is very near and dear to my heart, which is dinosaurs. As some of you might know, I am working on creating my own adventure, which is primarily about dinosaurs, and going to involve that pretty much exclusively. So I was overjoyed to hear that this book, Dr. Drolin's Dictionary of Dinosaurs, is coming to Pathfinder 2nd edition. Yes! We're getting there. We're getting cool content back into the Pathfinder sphere. And to talk to me about that project and the Kickstarter around it is Dr. Nathan Barling. Welcome. How are you doing?
I'm good, thanks. It's Dr. Nathan Barling.
Barling, sorry.
It's Dr. Drolin's the NPC we created. Don't worry, it's not the first time that's happened.
Okay. So you are a research paleontologist with Exeter University in the UK. You work with other scientists to create prehistoric creatures, environments, and rules for TTRPGs based on real science, which I think is probably one of the coolest things that I've ever seen someone do in the TTRPG space. I am a huge dinosaur fan, which always kind of breaks my heart when I watch things like Jurassic World, especially Jurassic World, that makes them into movie monsters and not like the incredible, graceful, sometimes, yes, terrifying creatures that they are. So I got the 5e book. I am not a 5e player. People know that I don't really like 5e. But I bought your 5e book because I was really impressed with the content. I loved the artwork that was inside of it, and all of the things that you are, like, the passion is clearly there in the book. And I loved every bit of it. So I'm super excited to see that it's coming to 2nd edition. So, Doctor, I just wanted to know, what has been your journey into paleontology, and what inspired you to turn your area of research into this game book?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for supporting us and buying the book and for letting me come on
Doctor,
here and
I just
waffle about the project. But yeah, so to start at the beginning then, really, I'm one of the Jurassic Park generation. That's my guilty secret in the world of paleontology. And many of my peers say the same thing, but try and keep it quiet. So that among the first scenes when you see the Velociraptor skeleton being unearthed was the inspiring moment for me as a child to think that's what I want to do. I want to do that. The reality of paleontology is very different, but but nonetheless, that was the start of my journey. And basically, I just followed academia up until went through, school, college, university, pursuing that path. And it wasn't until nonetheless COVID that I turned my attention to kind of pivoting my scientific research and my scientific background into TTRPGs. So I've always been a lifelong tabletop fan, both for role-playing and wargaming. You probably see the mountains of Warhammer models behind me.
I do. Impressive collection.
That's only a fraction, believe me. So it was during COVID. I was actually furloughed. So in the UK, that was a scheme whereby we were recommended to everyone to stay home, and basically the government essentially paid people's wages. And during that time, all of my friends were furloughed as well, and loads of people I knew. And so we all really got back into D&D in a really, really big way to kind of keep ourselves sane. Now, I had been playing for years before that, but that was when I started running a campaign where I wanted to have a significant dinosaur component, which you would have thought I would have done that sooner, but that was the time I really brought it in.
Yeah.
And the D&D 5e dinosaurs are pretty lackluster. They're very bland, and I found that the encounters were quite mundane. And so in that campaign, I started writing my own rules, writing my own rules for behavior, for how these animals would behave, and
Mhm.
sort of just taking all of my scientific knowledge and using it within the game. And the players loved it, and they actually started to learn stuff. And that's one thing I noticed. So by taking these animals and kind of building their ecology a bit more into their stat blocks, the players were having to actually learn about the animals so that when they fought them the next time, they knew how they would behave, which is
Mhm.
kind of how every combat encounter works, right? If you've got
Yeah.
a relatively complex animal or relatively complex encounter, you want to know if the BBG is going to be doing something, so you might tease it earlier on. Well, with the dinosaurs, I would have them fight one off, and then they might fight a pack later, and they're doing the same thing. So, in that respect, it became apparent to me that this was actually working as an educational tool.
Mhm.
Um, and then Humblewood dropped, and I think that changed everything in the TTRPG world
Ah.
quite significantly. Um, they were one of the first sort of like really big Kickstarter that was very, very widely well known. There were undoubtedly others before them, but they were the
Mhm.
ones that like everyone started talking about. Um, and at that point, it was like, oh, okay, actually, this is potentially a viable project.
Mhm.
We can potentially find crowdsourcing funding for this, sort of expanding that further. Um, so it was actually, there was literally an epiphany moment where I was sat. I remember it quite vividly. I was sat at my in-laws' house just after Christmas, and we were just talking about D&D in general, and I thought to myself, well, Humblewood did it. I know a lot about dinosaurs, and I've done this sort of stuff already.
Mhm.
And I happen to have friends who are very successful paleo artists. Why don't we see what we can do? And then a few months later, we launched it.
And I do have to say, the art in this book is incredible. It varies from like, you know, sometimes cartoony to like extremely realistic, and I love that. As you know, you said you're from Jurassic Park. I am too, but also one of my favorite books of all time is Dinotopia, which puts these dinosaurs uh, side by side with people, but in a much more respectful way. The art in that is fantastic, and a lot of the art in the book, I think, is comparable to that level. So that alone, I think, is worth the price of this book. But yeah, it is amazing, and also yes, you do learn a lot. I was really impressed by the fact that you didn't just like make these into like just stat blocks, but you have stuff about the ecology, the behavior, the phrenology, and the references. So I wanted to know like what went into the research of this, like in the book design. Uh, how did you decide to break things out into formation? Which I'm guessing the formations that you have in here are real formations, like Hell's Creek, but you have the Yggdrasill formation, the Baharia. Were those made up, or are those real ones?
So those are real formations.
Awesome.
So to kind of answer what went into writing the book, an awful lot. We
Mm-hmm.
we really really pushed and pushed ourselves to bring in as much detail as possible, but still maintain a sort of digestible content for laymen. We didn't want it to be overly scientific, and we didn't want it to be far too simplified.
Mm-hmm.
So my colleague Michael O'Sullivan, he did the bulk of the research for um, the actual behavior and ecology for the animals.
Mm-hmm.
I did the bulk of the research for kind of everything else. So yeah, but not to try and shine Mike out there. He seriously, that's a huge amount of work.
Sure.
But yeah, we actually went back to primary literature for this. So this isn't just, oh, we read a dinosaur book and we picked and chose what we found was interesting. We went straight to the original descriptive papers, and we picked out terminology that describes the anatomy of these animals, and then built the stat blocks based on information we found there. So a huge amount of work, too much work really, but it's work that we're very familiar with as scientists. So what some people might find very challenging to read one or two papers, we kind of have to, by necessity, for our own research, kind of have to smash through them anyway. So you get pretty lean at doing that. But yeah, it's an awful lot.
And I will say, for anyone who is watching this later and thinks that we're going to go into the 2E mechanics from 5E mechanics, Doctor has already done a great show with Roll for Combat with the primary 2E converter, Linda Zayas Palmer. You guys probably know her from Arcane Mark. And in that show, she goes into everything that it took to make the dinosaurs mechanically feasible for second edition, like what it took to bring the 5e things over into 2e. So I'm going to leave that part of the discussion to her. Go check out that stream. I'll have it linked in the show notes. We're just mostly going to be focusing on like the book itself, the content that is in there. Just know that just know that Linda is extremely good at what she does. I have every confidence that everything that you see in the 5e book is going to be brought over brilliantly into the 2e conversion.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Linda's phenomenal. Having seen some of the previews and drafts so far, the rules conversion is, you can't fault it.
Yeah.
Seriously, it's phenomenal. Very, very, very talented person. Very skilled woman.
It's exciting to know that we're going to get like what I think is a Paizo level quality book just about dinosaurs. So I did want to ask you, like, how did you choose the dinosaurs that you put in there? I know that you, having looked through it, these are not just, the Jurassic Park, Jurassic World ones that everyone knows, the T-Rex, Spinosaurus, though you certainly do have those in there. There's actually one that I messaged you about, and I wondered, how do you pronounce it? It's a huge titanosaur. So how did you decide to pick some dinosaurs that weren't in the public consciousness, and the research that went into making sure that they were accurately reflected in not just like the description of their ecology, their physiology, but also their game mechanics?
Yeah, so well, first of all, we definitely had to include some of the big, famous names. I think we would have been strung up if we hadn't.
Sure.
So but we wanted to avoid, where we could, we wanted to avoid trying to repeat stuff, but it was unavoidable in some cases. And so we wanted to give a bit of a limelight to some really much more unusual animals that are much, much less well known. To put it in perspective, there are far, far more dinosaurs than people realize.
Yeah.
I think, I might be wrong on this, but I think the quoted number is that for the last 10 years, there's been on average one described every week. So there are
really
thousands,
a week?
Yeah, thousands
a new one
and
every
thousands
week.
of dinosaurs.
Wow.
That's what I've been told. Whether or not that's accurate to the letter, but there certainly are far, far more than you find in a normal toy box, to put it that way. So the dinosaur you mentioned, I'm going to probably butcher pronouncing this as well. But this is Myanmar-Watatuka, which is Swahili, is where the name's taken from, the Swahili for the region that it's found in. And as you said, it's a titanosaur, so it's one of the big long-necked sauropod dinosaurs.
I'm just gonna, while you talk, I'm just gonna find the artwork because it is gorgeous and put it up to screen.
Yeah, sure. So this is an animal that one of the pivotal things we found about it, because as I said before, we went back to the original papers, so all the animals got that treatment regardless of their sort of fame, if you will.
Hmm.
So what we found about this animal was that had a part of its anatomy was heart shaped. So we thought, oh, that's cute. Let's build on that.
Here we
Um,
go.
yeah, Mark's artwork, stunning, isn't it? Um, so we
There
built
we
sort
go.
of on that in terms of the optional magical rules to make it all about charming people and spreading love, sort of thing, being
Yeah,
rather than being like just combat focused. But in terms of the actual stat block and balancing it relative to the other animals, we kind of took an approach of that we had certain themes that we wanted to carry across for different lineages of dinosaur. So
mhm.
for the sauropods, they've got these big, large columnar limbs. They're just overall very, very large animals. So we wanted to kind of build into having resilience and resistances based on that fact, but create different variants of different abilities that varied slightly in power levels, so that we didn't have the same, blanket ability for all sauropods that was just called
Yeah.
sauropod limbs or something. So every animal kind of has a slightly different take on the same theme if they're very closely related.
Hmm.
Um, and what we tried to aim for was we tried to scale the animal's power relative to each other, and then build those abilities to kind of reflect their power level, even though they're carrying essentially the same information across from what the animal was like.
Hmm. I have to imagine that because they're animals, they have to have roughly the uh, same kind of like vibe because you're not getting T-Rexes that spit fire or Dilophosaurus's, contrary to Jurassic Park, do not spit poisonous acid out at people. Though, of course, that's a fun mechanic. So you also had magic variants to them, which I thought was really cool. Um, so the same kind of thinking went into trying to find ways to make them fit more into a fantasy setting.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we did for the optional magical rules, so for people who are unaware, every single real animal in the book has an optional magical rule for it that usually increases its CR, and in Pathfinder, depending on how it plays out, will either have a new stat block or have just a level increase and an extra ability.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and what we did with those was we either doubled down on a aspect of the animal's biology to kind of expand it into a fantasy-esque design,
Mm-hmm.
or we took something from local folklore or something derived from the name of the animal, or basically anything that we could kind of draw inspiration from that was about that animal that we could then turn into some fantasy rules.
Mm-hmm.
Because we know that some people run really high magic settings. They don't want mundane animals. They want every bear is actually an owlbear. It's
Yeah.
like everything needs to be wacky in some way, and this gives people the opportunity to do that while maintaining the kind of core concept of that this is still a real animal and here's some real information about it behind it.
Mm-hmm. So that leads us into kind of the setting of the book. You have a character, Dr. Drolin, who is leading us on this prehistoric expedition. So who's that character, and how do you think that prehistoric creatures fit into a fantasy setting, along with all of these ones that are intrinsically magical or abominations?
Yeah, so Dr. Drolin, despite some people's comments, is not a self insert. He is an entirely fictitious character, and he's a dwarven scientist who is essentially written to be the narrator of the book. He's not based on one person per se, although his accent is based on my father-in-law's accent, who's
Oh.
he's got a weird mixture of accents from he used to live in Coventry and now he lives in Cornwall, and he
Mm-hmm.
lived in Somerset. So very kind of rural English.
Hmm.
And we wanted to use that accent because first of all, it deviates from the kind of cliche Scottish accent you get with dwarf designs.
Yeah,
So, uh,
absolutely.
but also still carry a kind of not deviate from that too much. But yeah, so Dr. Drolin's the narrator and as you said, the kind of the guide through the book. It's written as though it's his research notes from an expedition, and there's a few sort of storyline hooks about what he was doing, how he interacted with a few other NPCs, and the reason why he went on this expedition. Um, and in terms of how these animals fit into into sort of existing campaigns and the existing lore, we we wanted to make this what's called a splash book, right? In that we wanted you not to have to pick up the book and it be a campaign setting and you're either running a campaign in it or not. We wanted anyone to be able to take any of the content and put it in any game. And so we included a whole bunch of semi-vague plot hooks that are designed to be able to say, right, well, you can have these animals be part of a single story arc if you want, or you can expand it into a full campaign, or you can just chuck them in a random place and here's an explanation as to why they are there. So they're based on a lot of cliche pop culture, Jurassic Park, Ancient Plateau, various stuff like that, and Journey to the Center of the Earth as well, that sort of thing. So, but the main thing that we kind of wanted to carry through the book and how people would interact with it is to also interact with deep time. So by providing these holistic paleo environments, we wrote settings, plants, creatures, the works, all with their scientific information that are based on a real site that it is actually representative of what that site would be like in real life if you were to visit there, but converted into TTRPG rules. So that players can say, okay, my world has deep time, and therefore we can have a mini adventure where we end up through a portal. It takes us back 10 million years so far that you if you want to play with butterfly effects, that's something else, but if you don't want to do that, it's so far back that the world is so unbelievably unrecognizable compared to your current setting that you can kind of have almost like a one shot or a mini adventure within your campaign and it still feel believable. And we wanted to make everything feel believable.
Yeah.
And by then having the optional fantasy rules, if you've got high magic there, then you can have a tinge of that as well. But yeah, it's the idea is to take players and drop them into wherever you want them to be, rather than feeling like you have to adapt your world to match adding some dinosaurs.
That's very cool. So, how would you encourage GMs to run dinosaurs in a way that's both scientifically accurate but also mechanically fun at the table in these situations where players run into them, whether it's in the in the past or in the present of a fantasy setting?
Yeah, so we're hoping that it did for 5e, it should do for Pathfinder as well, but the abilities will kind of carry a lot of the bulk of that, in that the animals will have tailored attacks and abilities that are representative of their actual biology. But one of the things that GMs can really do is work on the behavior of these animals. And that's the main thing to remember, is that these are animals, they're not monsters.
Right.
They are not necessarily going to needlessly attack and fight to the death the first PC they see. So not every encounter has to be a combat encounter, but if you want to have a combat encounter with these animals, and you probably will, don't have them just fight to the death. Have a look at the behavior tables. Have a think about what a modern animal would do in this situation. If you end up scrapping with a a mountain lion, it's probably going to try and get you, and then if it can't, it's going to flee.
Yeah.
So
I noticed that in a lot of animal fighting videos, they're actually like a lot more boring in real life than they are, on the movie screen. In fact, like if they can, even two predators going at each other won't do much more than snarl at each other and make like a couple of swipes, not even at the creature like on their body, but just like in the air, just like, hey, back off.
Yeah. So we in 5e we tied that to a lot of intimidation checks. So we have a series of behavior tables that you can essentially roll to see how the animal is feeling when you arrive. And the thing is, with something like a large carnivore, they spend a lot of time sleeping.
Yeah.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that there has to be a non-encounter. That can then become a stealth check. What happens when you wake the animal? If you do, is it going to be angry? Is it going to be territorial? There is a lot you can derive in terms of sort of encounter mechanics from behavior. It doesn't have to be simplistic. We're working on making sure that carries across with Linda. We're working to make sure that because the intimidation is very different. There's not really intimidation in Pathfinder.
Yeah.
So we're going to make sure it's tight. We're going to make sure that works. But remember that if an encounter ends and a creature hasn't been defeated, it can always come back. And it can always come back at a time when the players might not expect it. Or it can come back with friends. You know, there's plenty of things you can draw out from it. But the main thing I would say is just try and keep in mind that these are animals and try and have them behave like animals.
Yeah.
And although that might lead to less dramatic moments in some cases, you know, you're not lopping the head off of the dragon at the end of it, but it will help with immersion. I really genuinely believe that. And I think it makes just everything feel much more believable.
And the current science says that T-Rex probably hunted in family groups, right? Not just like big solo monsters like in Jurassic Park.
Okay, so we suspect that one Tyrannosauroid, I believe it is Eutyrannus, has been found as what we believe was a family unit, and so probably did hunt as a pack. Whether or not that we can use sort of behavioral bracketing to apply that to the rest of the lineage is I'm not so sure about. There's ongoing debate about the behavior of animals like T-Rex, and because it's such a famous and popular animal, a lot of time is spent talking about this, and there's lots of people come up with all sorts of wacky ideas about it. So there was one paper that came out a while back that was talking about how it had hyper intelligence, tool making skills. It's just basically been regarded as nonsense. Yeah, like arms? Sort of. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, it's a lot. It's never as clear cut as we would like to answer questions like that. Yeah. Probably not, I would think. An animal that size, even if there's an abundance of food, I suspect that you're looking at an animal that's spending most of its time scavenging, and if it is hunting, it's doing so probably on its own. But then again, I'm not an expert on tyrannosaur behavior. So one of my friends is, and he might be watching, and I'll probably be getting a full caps bold email after this. Yeah.
if you're watching, friend, please feel free to enter it into the chat because that's going to show up even on the post stream, the live stream stuff. I'd be very interested in that answer because I think it'd be cool to not just put players up against one Tyrannosaurus, but maybe a few. So that kind of leads me into the next question is like, what is your favorite dinosaur? But also, what do you think is the most overrated one? And what kind of prehistoric creatures do you think need more time in the limelight?
Sure. So my favorite dinosaur is an animal called Duravenator. I fell in love with it when I first saw the fossil in real life. It's a small compsognathid, although I don't. Yeah, we made sure it's in the book, so you'll be able to find it.
Yeah.
136. I've seen some research suggesting that compsognathids may not even be a proper group, and they're actually just all juveniles of other animals. But we'll have to wait and see how the science evolves on that.
There we go.
But he's just a little guy, you know. He's just a cute little guy. It's from Germany, and it's got one of the most exquisite fossils I've ever seen. It's beautiful. So that's my favorite. In terms of animals that are overrated, part of me wants to say Spinosaurus because it is so popular and so talked about. But it's so talked about because it's actually quite an interesting animal, I think. And we have so many variations in reconstruction of it through the years that there's a lot to chat about.
Well, it
So
always comes up as the biggest dinosaur, even though
one
like
of the yeah
even though
yeah
like it's really that huge sail and not so much like the
yeah
body, you know?
I believe the last few discussions have said it's the longest theropod,
Mm.
um, but definitely not the heaviest. Um, Interestingly enough, though, if you read, there was in our book we've got the Blue Death, which is the ancient Tyrannosaurus. There's actually some discussion about the limits and size of the maximum size of these animals, and there's been some recent discussion about, are we actually getting the maximum sizes of these animals, or how long would it take for us to statistically find the largest examples? And it's like, if we were searching for 500 more years, we might find the largest. So actually, some of the biggest versions of these animals are probably going to be significantly larger than the specimens we have now. So we
Wow.
don't really have a firm understanding of which is the biggest theropod dinosaur, but there's quite a few of them, which is a good thing, I think.
Yeah.
But jumping back to the question, I think probably the animal I think is the most overrated is the Jurassic Park reconstruction of Velociraptor, because it's
Ah.
just it's just it's funny because I think it's quite a bland reconstruction, if nothing else. Even though
Mm.
the sizing's wrong and the wrists are broken and it should have feathers and what have you, but that aside, it's kind of a bit generic, I
Yeah.
think.
They're more closely modeled after either Deinonychus or Utah raptor, right?
Correct. Yeah. So I believe that that what happened was that when Michael Crichton was writing the book Jurassic Park, at the time there was some discussion about whether Deinonychus was actually a species of Velociraptor, as Velociraptor being the genus,
Mm-hmm.
and so he incorporated that into um, his book design, and then it turned out to not be the case.
Mm-hmm.
So I think he was trying to be ahead of the curve, and it kind of backfired in that regard.
Yeah.
Um, that's what I've been told. Whether or not that's accurate to the reality, who
I
knows?
think
But
I think I've seen the same thing in the extra features. Uh so like the quote from the kid looks like a 6-foot turkey. Real velociraptors were the size of
yeah,
turkeys.
yeah, well, yeah, perhaps a bit, certainly longer.
Yeah.
Maybe not as heavy. But, well, maybe. Oh, anyway,
It would
yeah,
be a very
that makes
different movie
sense.
to have turkey-sized dinosaurs running after everyone than like
I mean, it'd still be
big
quite
people. Yeah,
dangerous.
absolutely. I wouldn't want a turkey chasing me. Those things are
Yeah.
terrifying. But uh, I totally get that. So what do you think are overrated or not overrated, but like creatures that more people should know about?
Honestly, there's so many. There's just so many, and that was kind of one of the goals of the book, was to try and introduce some of the more unusual creatures.
Mm-hmm.
So we put some, for non-dinosaurs, we put some Euthroseuchids in, which are like these predatory animals, but these predatory reptiles that are quadrupedal, and they have huge heads compared to their body size. They're really bizarre looking. It's like you take a T-Rex skull and just stick it on like a rhino sort of thing. It's really weird.
Mm-hmm.
But there's more than I could possibly list. There's so many cool things, like Charvopteryx, another strange reptile. It's the only delta-winged animal known, where it's got its wings on its hind limbs.
All right,
Like,
the huge wings. There's that.
I know it's only, yeah, huge wings on a tiny little lizard.
Yeah,
It's well, it's not a lizard, but yeah,
I've seen the meme about that and I love it. It's
yeah,
one of my favorites. That's excellent. So yeah, I feel the same way. Therizinosaurus was one that I always thought was like in my back pocket as far as like cool dinosaurs to pull out. Uh, I first heard about them in this show called Chased by Dinosaurs, which is like a BBC documentary of someone going back in time, and I always thought they were incredible. Now Jurassic World has co-opted them, and they make it look like a big scary monster, which I think
Yeah.
is always a little disappointing. Um, okay, so let's get back into the discussion about like the book. What, if any, differences will there be between the 5e content and the 2e versions?
So we're going to try and keep as much the same as possible, but particularly with the stat blocks for the animals. Where there will be significant changes are things like ancestries, backgrounds, that sort of
Mm-hmm.
stuff, where they are fundamentally very different between the two systems. Overall, there will be slightly more content in the Pathfinder version.
Hmm.
I think almost entirely due to the fact that each background will be like 4 to 6 pages rather than just the two.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, we'll be trimming back things like the some of the we have standard 5e feats in there. We'll
Mm-hmm.
try and keep those sorts of things in, but we'll almost certainly be trimming back on those in the backgrounds. Particularly backgrounds have like in 5e have lots of tables for rolling about your personality quirks and stuff like that. Won't have that for Pathfinder, I don't think. We've discussed keeping some of that stuff in just for flavor, but we will have to be trimming bits to make space for the expanded ancestry. So
Mm-hmm.
uh, we've got a pretty good idea of what we're going to do, but there are still, I don't want to promise anything just because there are still some things that we'll have to look at
Yeah.
post editing sort of stage.
But this isn't, yeah, so this isn't just a GM book. This does actually have a lot of really fun looking player options. So I wanted to give you some chance to talk about those. So you have, let's see, 6 different ancestries: the Pluvin, the Menihorn, the Jalorak, the Anklier, Limakin, and the Children of Seth, as
Yes.
well as a couple of archetypes and backgrounds. But let's talk about those ancestries first. What what are they, and how did the dinosaurs that they're based on inspire like the abilities and stuff?
Yeah. So our first approach when we started doing the ancestries, where we didn't want to do the classic lizard men, Aztec themed or Aztec inspired jungle dwelling temple city lizard men. There's so much of that out there already. We wanted to totally change that aesthetic. And so we picked a bunch of animals and a couple of groups of animals, and then kind of tried to build our own aesthetic for each one of them, drawing inspiration from various cultures and themes. And we we really went for the for a few of them we went for unusual creatures. We wanted to kind of do some strange stuff. So the first let's talk about the Pluvin, which are just our raptor folk. So the idea behind the Pluvin is a Cornish word for feather. They're based on rural oldie time English Cornwall, so they're kind of village folk. They're a bit like hobbits in that regard, um, but they're
Hobbits
obligate
with claws.
carnivores. Yeah, they'll eat you if you upset them. And But they're supposed to be a variety of raptor folk, so they can come in all sorts of shapes, sizes, colors, plumages, what have you. We wanted to keep that variety in there, and the same with the Menihorn, which is our ceratopsian folk. We wanted to
Mm-hmm.
say, oh, you don't have to be Triceratops. If you want to have any sort of horn ornamentation you want, you can have it. And so the Menihorn are kind of like this um, or this sort of guild inspired, a little bit of drawn a bit of inspiration in terms of the idea of having guilds and dual colors from Magic Gatherings Guilds of Ravnica.
Mm-hmm.
But they're kind of each one is a bespoke, custom built sort of economic power, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And we wanted to kind of have different factions of Menihorn, but are not tied to species, so that you can be any species from any guild and look however you want. For the Limukin and the Jorak, we decided to pick smaller, less well-known animals that just had that were definitely dinosaurs, but were very different. So the Limukin are based on Nimosaurus, which is we believe is quite an animal that undergoes a dramatic change as it matures.
Mm-hmm.
So we think that it starts off carnivorous when it's newly hatched, or omnivorous, sorry, and then it transitions to being fully herbivorous as it matures.
Oh,
And so
okay.
we wanted to carry that across in an ancestry, as well as stylistically, it's kind of a bit sleeker than most other dinosaur folk, and we've done it as it's an unfeathered animal, whereas the Jolrak are feathered. They are based on a herbivorous dinosaur, Joholosaurus, and we wanted to kind of bring in another small race that had a very, very different style and theme to them. So they're kind of, we ended up going down the route of them not being evil, but them being like, they have a highly political society that's very everyone in the example society we provide is like, there's a lot of self-interest and backstabbing and like coercion, and like people are trying to vie for power constantly. So we just wanted to come up with something totally sort of out of a left field for that, totally out of the blue.
A very Game of Thrones kind of vibe.
Yeah, quite heavily inspired by Game of Thrones. Not quite as gory or as sexual, but
yeah.
But yeah. And then the Ankylosaurus was like specifically requested. Everyone was like, we want Ankylosaurus. We want to play as Ankylosaurus. So, and then we definitely wanted a pterosaur race. We went for the Children of Seth, based on Thalassodromius sethii, which is where the name's taken from. And we just wanted to go for a pterosaur that wasn't Pteranodon, basically.
Yeah.
It was not cliche. It was something a bit different.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, that's a part of, like, the book too, is just like there are so many different variations of these otherwise cliche dinosaurs that are either just as terrifying or twice as beautiful. And I did think that the Seth template was one of those dinosaurs that like kind of blows Pteranodon out of the water as far as like how it looks, the crest that has. Probably not going to be able to find it very quickly. But either way, those sound like great options. But you also had a couple things that I think will either be turned into archetypes or various backgrounds. So what are some of those, and what, like, obviously Linda is going to be transferring them over to second edition, but what was your thinking of including them as either archetypes or backgrounds?
Yeah, so we did 3 subclasses for 5e. How they'll translate across is still being discussed. We've got some pretty solid ideas, but yeah, we'll see how it all plays out. So the first is the big game hunter, which for 5e is a hunter subclass. For Pathfinder, it's going to be a series of it's a ranger subclass, and then for 5e, it's going to be a series of feats that are sort of follow the exact same theme, so you can build it using a series of feats for the established class. That's basically the inspiration for that one is Van Pelt from Jumanji, which is kind of like the pith hat wearing great a bit, not necessarily a good guy, we'll put it that way. But we wanted to like double down on the idea that you get like all sorts of crazy trick shots and you can do all sorts of fun things like that, but in exchange you give up your ability to fight in melee combat. That almost certainly won't carry across to Pathfinder, but we'll see what we can do with that. I then, for the Artificer, which is one of my favorite classes, we built the Bone Sculptor for 5e, which is basically like a gory reimagining of the Artificer, where you harvest resources from slain foes to build your armor and weapons, and then it's essentially gets a bunch of necromancer stuff as well, and then has a companion pet that is a very highly customizable undead creature, effectively.
Very cool.
And then the final one is the Circle of Cycles Druid, which will be transformed into a druidic order for Pathfinder. And with this, when we announced that we were going to do a druid, everyone was like, "Oh, dinosaur druid, shapeshifting of dinosaurs." But for 5e, you've already got that.
Yeah.
In,
Pathfinder, you have dinosaur form as well.
Exactly. So we wanted to go with a deep time druid. So it's quite it's quite someone described it as trippy. That's the best way to describe it, perhaps, where it's all about extracting knowledge from the past and extracting knowledge from the future, and messing with the evolutionary lineage of a creature, which I think is quite cool.
That is
But we'll
cool.
see how that plays. Yeah, we'll see how that plays out. In terms of the backgrounds, we came up with loads. We wanted to introduce things like being a paleontologist, being a geologist, and actually distinguishing those from each other. And then you mentioned to me like the time lost.
Yeah, that one seemed really cool.
So the idea behind that is that rather than being, for 5e, you'd have an outlander, which is just someone who lives in the wilds. Rather than that, we want it to be you're someone who's actually been hurtled through time, and so everything about the world is unfamiliar to you. You may be savvy with, living in the wilds, but this is a very different wilds to what you're used to.
Right.
Technology is very different. The peoples are very different. The creatures are very different. So trying to convey that in sort of the personality traits of the background there. Again, I think backgrounds, as I mentioned before, will be losing some of that. So we'll find other ways to bring that in where we can.
Yeah. Still, it's a very fun concept, I think. There's so many various like Lost World-esque movies and stuff where there's always that some person who has survived their entire life, and that seemed like that kind of vibe of someone who has lived with dinosaurs and is just kind of used to it, and needs to get used to like the concrete jungle when they get brought out of there. So a lot of cool player options as well as GM stuff, but that leads me to the final GM thing that I wanted to talk about, which is these really incredible fantasy dinosaurs that you added. The Rechglow, the Cthulhu, you mentioned the ancient T-Rex as well. So what kind of advice do you have for creators, especially who want to make fantasy dinosaurs where they're not just, the dinosaurs themselves, but also have some kind of incredible magicalness about them?
Yeah, so we did get seeds of design styling from our pledges for this. So for these sort of high fantasy ones, we actually had a tier on the Kickstarter where people could opt to have a dinosaur in the book, and as expected, loads of people asked for Spinosaurus. So two of our top pledges asked for Spinosaurus, and as we already had Spinosaurus unlocked through a different stretch goal, they opted to have magical variants rather than repicking dinosaurs. So they gave us some ideas of what we want, and then we built on that significantly. So but my advice for other GMs, and if you wanted to do this, is basically construct a story. There's two sides to it. So construct a story, and then understand the ecology of the animal you're trying to represent, if it's going to have that ecology maintained. So Zuthul was a really interesting one, because the idea behind it was a regular Spinosaur, and it traveled in search of new feeding grounds, and it ended up in some highlands, in some highland lakes, searching for fish because it was starving. At that point, it started ingesting some magical crystals that it happened upon, largely through chance at first, and then later on intentionally. Ultimately transforming it into this giant magical crystal Spinosaur.
Incredible
over the
artwork.
Course of
just amazing.
Mark did an amazing job throughout the book. So what we wanted to do with that was that was the ecology behind it. Was right. This is how this animal lived. This is why it's ended up changed, and fundamentally, it's a semi-aquatic or aquatic predator. How can we reflect that in the changes of rules? So we wanted to think, okay, we might want it to be able to swim in lava, potentially. So we gave it some abilities to give itself immunity to fire damage. We then also built on the idea that it had been consuming these magical crystals for sustenance, and they provided it with sort of unnatural magical energies. What effect would that have on a creature? So for Zulthul, it has like this surging innate power that it can't really control. And so at the start of a turn, the start of a battle round, the GM rolls to see what random buff it gets, and whether or not it's just like surging with power, making it faster or stronger, or if it's got lightning shooting out of it, sort of big arcs of energy.
Mm-hmm.
And then the whole design philosophy for that animal, that monster, was to have it be just like erupting with power. So instead of getting like a dragon's breath, it just like explodes with energy and just bolts of lightning and energy just fire out in all directions, and players have to dodge out the way of it if they can. As well as when it roars at you, it kind of has shards of these crystals in its breath because it's been eating them. So there's some abrasion from that as well. So that's what I would suggest. Focus on 2 points: a story and the ecology.
Excellent. So we're at the end of our time, but I do know that you are coming out with a sequel book based off of your Reddit AMA. Are there any previews that you can give to us to get viewers excited for your next Kickstarter?
Yeah, so thank you for the shameless plug at the end. But yeah, so we're going to be doing another Kickstarter. We want to offer many more animals that are not just Mesozoic reptiles. So we will still be doing dinosaurs and pterosaurs and others, but we're also going to be looking at all of the other groups of animals across all of our history. Mm-hmm. So if you like Cenozoic mammals, your giant saber-toothed cats, things like that. If you like Paleozoic mollusks and you want some interesting snails, you giggle, but you wait till you see them. And everything in between, basically.
I'm looking forward to the single-cell organisms that you make.
We're not quite going that far, but maybe we should. I'll also do a few other teasers. We're doing more ancestries, so we will be doing saber-toothed cat folk, which, interestingly, for 5e you have... oh gosh, the name's blanking on me now. You have... goodness, I play them all the time. Why is my name blank? Why's the name blanking? Tabaxi, that's it. You have the Tabaxi, which are kind of representative of like all cat folk. Saber-toothed cats are very different from other cats. They're much stockier, much slower. So we're going to kind of lean into that. That should be quite exciting. And we're going to be doing trilobite folk as well. And I don't know if you know much about trilobites, but they're very interesting animals. So I'm very excited about that, and lots more. We've got many more planned beyond those two. And to build on what we did last time, we introduced like loads of extra supplementary rules, so mutation tables, these holistic environments, like naming tables, all that's in the book. We're going to be doing a system for harvesting, gathering fossils and artifacts, and then housing them in a museum. So
because they belong in a museum.
They belong in a museum. And then the secret sauce we're adding to that as well is that, well, if you can have a museum, you can earn a decent income from it. But then what happens if there's NPCs who want to do sort of Ocean's 11 style heists on your museum? And how are you going to cope with that? Ooh. So we're trying to build a system for that as well. And we're really enjoying it so far. I think it's going to go quite well, but I'll from there so that no one steals our ideas.
Absolutely. Well, I'm looking forward to that, but I am super excited for your current project, Dr. Drolin's Dictionary of Dinosaurs for 2nd edition. Go ahead and tell us, where can we go to support the Kickstarter? Where can we find more of you and be able to stay up to date with your future projects?
Yeah, so the best place to find our content is on our website, www.PalaeoGames.com, and that's the British spelling of paleo, so it's got the extra A.
Yeah.
So watch out for that.
I've had it going along the screen, so should have a couple references to it.
Excellent. And then, we're obviously on Kickstarter. There's a direct link to that from our website, but it's called Pathfinder 2nd Edition, Dr. Drolin's Dictionary of Dinosaurs is the name of the Kickstarter. I am at PalaeoGames on Blue Sky and at PalaeoFox on Twitter /X. And then we're also on Facebook and various other places, but don't worry too much about that. we do update there as well. But if you're on any of our other parts, you'll see everything we're doing as well.
Well, you have already been funded, so we know that this book is coming. I hope that this interview helps get you some more support, because I would love to be able to see not just the this project in TUI, but the next project come to TUI as well. So I hope that this Kickstarter is as successful. Probably not, won't be more successful than the 5e1 if we're honest, but I hope that it justifies the TUI version for your next book as well. So with that, thank you so much for coming on to the show, talking about your book. Thank you for making the book in the first place.
Well, thank you for inviting me on as well.
Absolutely. And to you viewers, if you like what you have seen, make sure to subscribe to the channel. I'm going to be doing more interviews on here with more people who are bringing great content into the Paizosphere. And of course, check out my main podcast, Rise of the Rule Lord, which you can find on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other places. And you can find more of me at rulelord2e.com, as well as on socials at rulelord2e. But until that next session, don't let the rules rule you. Oh.